Wife gave me a 12-page marriage contract with rules. I CC'd her on a divorce lawyer email, and the judge said I deserve hazard pay. Reddit story. I never thought marriage would turn into a legal contract, but that's exactly what happened. My name's Daniel. I'm 38, and I've been married to Claire, 35, for almost 8 years. We live in Chicago. From the outside, people assumed we had a steady, well-balanced life. We had a nice apartment, steady routines, and no kids by choice. Friends would often tell us how perfectly matched we looked. But inside our home, it was different. It didn't feel like a partnership anymore. Some days, it felt like I was on trial. Like every word, every move I made, was being evaluated. It all began in a way that didn't seem threatening at first. Claire had gotten into this phase of reading relationship books. Not the lighthearted kind, but heavy, structured stuff. Guides about building systems of accountability in marriage. She spent hours watching videos about marriage frameworks and optimized communication models. I brushed it off. People go through phases. I figured this was just Claire's way of trying to improve things, maybe organize her thoughts about our relationship. I didn't think much of it. Then one morning, while I was sipping my coffee, she slid a stapled packet across the table. "What's this?" I asked, picking it up. Her face was calm, almost businesslike. "Your new marriage contract." I chuckled, waiting for her to crack a smile. Surely, this was a joke. But her expression didn't change. She just folded her hands and watched me, as if she was waiting for me to start reading. I flipped through the pages, scanning lines filled with bullet points, sections, and subsections. The first header read, "Daily Obligations." I looked up. "You're not serious." "I am," she said. "Every marriage is a contract. Most couples just leave it unspoken. I think it's healthier to make ours explicit. That way, we avoid confusion about expectations." I stared at her, trying to decide if she was testing me. "So you actually typed this up?" "Yes. 12 pages, she said matter-of-factly. "It took me 2 weeks. You should read it before we sign." "Sign?" I repeated, setting it down like it might burn a hole in the table. "Yes. A contract is meaningless without signatures." I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry. I remember saying something like, "Claire, marriage is supposed to be about trust and love, not about clauses and penalties." She just tilted her head slightly, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Trust and love are easier when expectations are clear. This protects us both. But even in that moment, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like a negotiation. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about the packet. The neat bullet points. The word obligations written over and over. It wasn't just a list of chores or responsibilities. It was something bigger. It was a shift in the way she saw me and us. Not as equals building a life together, but as someone she had to manage. And that realization stayed with me. It was the first time I truly felt like our marriage was heading into dangerous territory. I finally sat down with the packet a day later. Part of me didn't want to, but curiosity got the better of me. If Claire was this serious, I needed to know what I was dealing with. The first section was titled Daily Obligations. It spelled out tasks I was required to complete: taking out the trash before 8 a.m., making the bed within 20 minutes of waking up, and initiating at least one meaningful compliment per day. There were even checkboxes printed next to each one, like she expected to mark them off. The next section, Weekly Goals, was even stranger. It included things like initiate intimacy no fewer than 3 times per week, cook at least one dinner without being asked, and spend one uninterrupted evening dedicated solely to Claire. I shook my head in disbelief. And then came penalties for breach. That part made my stomach twist. If I failed to meet obligations, penalties ranged from restricted recreational activities, which basically meant no video games or outings with friends, to relationship credits forfeited, a phrase she never fully explained. By the time I reached page 6, I felt like I was reading the rulebook for some dystopian game instead of a marriage. That evening, I confronted her. "Claire, this is insane," I said, holding up the stack of papers. "You actually expect me to follow this?" "Yes," she said evenly. "Think of it like guidelines. If we're both clear on expectations, neither of us can feel neglected." I pointed at one paragraph. "This says I can't play video games unless I've earned relationship credits. What does that even mean?" "It means," she explained, "if you invest energy into the marriage first, you can relax later." "Balance." I let out a humorless laugh. "This isn't balance. This is control." Her expression didn't flicker. "Every healthy system has structure. You just don't like accountability." That's when I noticed something odd. The section labeled spousal responsibilities, Claire was missing. I flipped back and forth through the pages. "Nothing. Where's your part?" I asked. She didn't even hesitate. "I'm the contract drafter. My role is managerial. You're the performer. That's just how it works." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. "So, You get to write the rules, but you don't follow any yourself? That's not what I said, she replied calmly. I hold myself accountable in different ways. But for our relationship to thrive, one person has to lead. I'm better at that. I just stared at her. The woman I married, the one I used to laugh with over late-night takeout, the one who once surprised me with concert tickets just because she thought I'd enjoy it, was now talking like a corporate manager outlining quarterly objectives. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't about building us up. It wasn't even about fairness. It was about control. I placed the packet back on the table and slid it toward her. I'm not signing this. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't argue. She just said, think about it, as though I were rejecting a business proposal. But I didn't need time to think. I already knew. This wasn't love. This was paperwork dressed up as a marriage. I thought refusing to sign the contract would end the whole charade. I figured she'd eventually drop it, maybe realize how ridiculous the idea was. But Claire didn't let it go. If anything, she doubled down. A week later, I came home from work and saw a new version of the contract taped to the fridge. This one had bright yellow highlights across entire paragraphs. At the bottom, she had written amendments for noncompliance. I stood there reading lines like, failure to fold laundry in a timely manner equals breach of weekly obligations. Lack of midday communication equals signs of disengagement. She had even drawn little arrows pointing to each section, as if she were preparing notes for a presentation. That night, while I was brushing my teeth, I noticed my phone buzz on the counter. Claire had just sent me an email with the subject line, Daniel's violations. I opened it and found a Word document with photos attached. One was of a plate I'd left in the sink. Another was of socks on the living room floor. Each had captions like, repeat offense, lack of accountability. I laughed out loud at first, but the humor didn't last long. The sheer seriousness of her effort started to wear on me. This wasn't a joke to her. She was documenting my every move, like she was building a legal case. It came to a head one Saturday night. Claire invited a few of our friends over for dinner. I assumed it was just a casual get-together, some wine, food, and catching up. Instead, halfway through the evening, she pulled out a stack of printed papers and began passing them around the table. My heart dropped when I realized what they were. Copies of the so-called marriage contract. She stood at the head of the table and said, I want you all to act as witnesses. Daniel has been resistant to accountability, and I think having external input could help. I felt heat rush to my face. My buddy Mark raised his eyebrows at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. One of our other friends leaned over and whispered, Dude, blink twice if you need rescue. The entire dinner turned into what Claire called a marriage arbitration session. She read out sections of the contract, listing examples of my noncompliance. Every time she said the word breach, I wanted to crawl under the table. At one point, Mark finally interrupted. Claire, are you seriously holding a tribunal for your husband in your dining room? She didn't flinch. I'm trying to create transparency. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, put my hands on the table, and said, This isn't transparency. This is humiliation. The room went silent. I walked out onto the balcony just to breathe, but that night I realized something important. Claire wasn't going to stop. This wasn't just a quirky phase or her way of expressing frustration. It was her new obsession, to run our marriage like a legal case she had to win. And that's when I decided to do something she never expected. While she was sitting at her desk later that week, typing up yet another list of my supposed failures, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to a divorce lawyer. The subject line was simple, breach of marriage contract, request for dissolution. And because I wanted her to see it, I CC'd Claire. The email went out late on a Wednesday evening. I didn't think too hard about it. I just hit send, closed my laptop, and sat there for a moment in silence. 20 minutes later, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Claire was firing off text after text. This isn't funny. You're making a huge mistake. Take it back, Daniel. By the time I got home that night, the contract was gone from the fridge. Claire was pacing the living room like she'd just lost an important case. You think this is funny? She snapped the moment I walked in. No, I said, setting my keys on the counter. But you want contracts and penalties? Fine. Let's talk about termination clauses. She froze, staring at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. For the first time in years, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger, but fear. We stood there in silence until she finally turned away and stormed into the bedroom. I thought maybe the email would shock her into backing off. I was wrong. 2 days later, I opened my inbox to find a new message from her. Attached was a polished PDF titled Incident Report, Breach of Spousal Duties. It looked exactly like a corporate HR memo. Headers, bullet points, timestamps. My so-called violations included failure to provide consistent verbal appreciation, leaving socks on living room floor, repeat offense, emotional disengagement during Tuesday dinner, At the bottom, she had signed it like a manager, Claire M., senior partner. I rubbed my forehead and laughed in disbelief. But she wasn't joking. She had even CC'd her sister, Madison, who happened to be a corporate lawyer. Not a family lawyer, a corporate attorney. Within an hour, Madison replied, "Daniel, I strongly advise you to take these reports seriously. They could be used in future proceedings." That's when the weight of it hit me. Claire wasn't treating this like a marriage anymore. She was treating it like a hostile takeover. And I wasn't her husband. I was her employee under review. When Claire brought Madison into this circus, I thought it couldn't possibly get more absurd. But Claire wasn't done. She decided to escalate. A few days later, my parents called me out of the blue. My mom sounded confused, my dad annoyed. Apparently, Claire had sent them a long email with the subject line, "Concerns about Daniel's commitment to marriage." It was formatted like some quarterly business report. She had broken it down into sections with bullet points. Decline in enthusiasm since year 3 of marriage. Repeated avoidance of household obligations. Failure to maintain consistent communication standards. And, as if that wasn't enough, she attached a graph. A literal line graph tracking what she described as my emotional engagement. My mom read the email and immediately replied all. "Claire, this is not a board meeting. Daniel is our son, not your employee. Seek therapy." My dad followed with his own note. "Also, your graph is upside down." When they told me this over the phone, I didn't know whether to laugh or feel humiliated. The fact that Claire had actually dragged my parents into this, as if they were shareholders in a failing company, was unbelievable. I braced myself for Claire to feel embarrassed, maybe even regretful. But instead, she doubled down. That evening, she came into the living room holding another folder. "Your parents don't understand structure," she said, as if she were giving me a report on a failed project. I looked at her and asked, "Do you hear yourself? This isn't structure, it's control. You're treating our marriage like some hostile merger." Her face stayed calm, but I could see her eyes burning. "Maybe you just don't want to be accountable." That was the moment I realized she wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't second-guessing herself at all. She was convinced she was right. And if my family wouldn't validate her, she was ready to find someone who would. The following week, Claire told me she had scheduled what she called a reconciliation session. I assumed it meant therapy, which honestly I was open to. If a professional could talk some sense into her, maybe we had a chance. But when I walked into our living room that Saturday, I knew immediately it wasn't therapy. The coffee table had been pushed aside. A whiteboard stood in the corner, covered in color-coded sticky notes. And sitting on our couch was a man I had never seen before, in a cheap suit, holding a clipboard. Claire introduced him like this. "Daniel, this is Evan. He's a relationship strategist. Not a licensed therapist. Not even a counselor. Just some guy from LinkedIn who branded himself as a strategist." He smiled politely, then handed me a flowchart titled, "Areas Where Daniel Underperforms." I didn't sit down. "Are you serious right now?" I asked Claire. "This is for us," she said firmly. "You need accountability, and Evan specializes in helping couples create systems." I scanned the flowchart. It listed things like inconsistent energy during conversations and failure to meet weekly intimacy metrics. Metrics? Like I was a sales rep missing quotas. I lasted maybe 10 minutes before I walked out. "This is insane. You're humiliating me in my own house." She crossed her arms, calm as ever. "No, Daniel. I'm holding you accountable." That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my brother. I couldn't take it anymore. But Claire wasn't finished. A few days later, I started getting screenshots from friends. Claire had launched a Facebook group called Marriage Accountability Network. It was filled with posts about my supposed breaches. She didn't name me directly, but anyone who knew us could figure it out. One post read, "What do you do when your spouse refuses to meet even basic obligations? How do you enforce accountability without enabling laziness?" People commented, and not the way she wanted. Friends wrote things like, "Claire, this is toxic, and marriage isn't a contract, it's a partnership." Someone even tagged me privately and wrote, "Man, I don't know how you're still dealing with this." I forwarded everything to my lawyer. His response was short but telling. "This is gold. She just handed us evidence of emotional abuse and public humiliation." When the divorce hearing finally came, Claire didn't just show up with her lawyer. She brought binders, charts, and a PowerPoint presentation. The title slide read, "Why Claire Deserves Alimony, a Performance-Based Case." I sat there staring at the screen as she clicked through bullet points about her emotional labor investment and lost years of optimization. It was like watching someone defend a failed business project, except the project was our marriage. Sitting in that courtroom, I almost couldn't believe this was my life. Claire stood at the front, clicking through her PowerPoint presentation like she was pitching investors. Each slide had bullet points, graphs, even pie charts. Titles like Daniel's Decline in Enthusiasm and Cumulative Spousal Breaches. The judge watched for about 30 seconds before holding up a hand. Mrs. M, this is not a corporate negotiation. This is family court. That was the first time I saw Claire falter. Her shoulders stiffened, and her carefully rehearsed tone cracked just slightly. Then it was our turn. My lawyer calmly laid out the so-called contracts, the incident reports, the screenshots from her Facebook group. He described it all as systematic micromanagement disguised as marriage. The judge's expression shifted from confusion to something closer to horror. At one point, he muttered under his breath, "I've seen controlling spouses before, but never like this." The ruling was straightforward, equal asset split, no alimony. And then the judge added something I'll never forget. He looked directly at Claire and said, "If anything, Mr. M deserves hazard pay." The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. Outside the courtroom, Claire tried one last time. She stepped toward me, binder still in her hands. "We can fix this," she insisted. "Let's just renegotiate the terms." I looked her in the eye, steady this time. "No more contracts. This partnership is terminated." She froze, lips pressed tight, and for the first time in months, she had no comeback. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've rebuilt my life slowly. I've been dating Emily, someone I met at a coffee shop. She's warm, straightforward, and when I finally told her the whole story, she laughed so hard she almost spilled her drink. "You were basically married to an HR department," she said. Meanwhile, Claire hasn't exactly moved on. A mutual friend told me she started a YouTube channel called Optimized Love Contracts. Her first video barely scraped 100 views, most of them dislikes. Someone commented, "This lady is the HR manager of marriage." The comment went viral as a meme. I didn't comment. I didn't share it. But I won't lie, hearing about it felt like some kind of strange closure. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that love isn't supposed to feel like a performance review. You don't need contracts or penalties to know if you're valued. You just know. And when that disappears, no stack of papers will bring it back. I appreciate you watching till the end. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more content.